Welcome to the Better Podcast, where you and I get better in this game called life. I'm Chin, your co-host today, and I co-founded The Smart Investor, an investment site where we talk about stocks all day.
And I'm your co-host Ser Jing. I run the Good Investors investment blog and a global equities investment fund together with my friend Jeremy Chia. Now, before we start, here's a disclaimer. Nothing on this show should be taken as investment advice. It is purely for informational and entertainment purposes only. All opinions expressed in this show by us and our guests are solely our own opinions. We and our guests may hold positions in the financial assets discussed in the show, and these holdings are subject to change at any time.
Hello, and welcome back, everyone. It's 20th of May. We're recording at around 4 p.m. My name is Chin again, and I'm here with Ser Jing. So just so you know, every topic we discuss today is not pre-planned. We're just having a conversation between myself and Ser Jing. And I'm going to start here today. And I want to talk about something which I think some of us may start experiencing right now or in the months ahead. I'm talking about business performances. If you follow any shares, some of your stocks or businesses which you follow may start to underperform, right? And when that happens, I think there are a few sort of things which happen, which I think that everyone should take note of. And I want to use the example of meta platforms. I'm just going to call them Facebook because meta platforms is such a mouthful. And
How about just Meta?
well, I can do that too. But Facebook just rolls off your tongue, I think.
It does.
Yeah, so I wanted to use the example of Meta because I think that recently they reported results and then you can see the reaction and in the shares. And part of it is, I think, justified, right? Because there are some problems which Meta is actually facing. So let me give you some context, right? So in February, when they reported their fourth quarter earnings for the fourth quarter for 2021, they reported a decline in daily active users of 1 million people, right? And they also talked about the threat of TikTok and the changes in Apple, which have caused their business to actually lose out a potential $10 billion in business, right? Or revenue. And when you hear all this bad news from your business, I think that a few things happen, right? I think that when there is sort of bad news which is given out, what it tends to feed is the negative sentiment crowd. If you're already negative on the business itself, it just gives you this massive, confirmation bias, or sort of like a supernova of confirmation bias, where you just explode and have massive schadenfreude. So I wanted to share some of the sort of headlines which followed after February, and there's such one of the headlines said that Meta's perfect storm, right? This is a headline, and it says that fleeing users and Apple privacy changes hits ads business. Another headline said Facebook is the big loser in fourth quarter's advertising wars. And the last one is another ominous note where it says that Facebook knows that it's losing its battle against TikTok, right? So all this headline, none of them sound good. It sounds extremely negative. And I want to sort of talk through them and use this example of how you should think about it as if some of your businesses start reporting bad news, right? So on the first point where Meta actually said that they lost 1 million active users, I think right off the bat, if you put it into the context of its overall daily active users, it's a 0.05% loss in daily active users, right? It's so minor that it shouldn't even deserve a mention. And the thing here is that if you look at the monthly active users, it is actually up for both Facebook and also its family of apps, because it's not just Facebook we're talking about. There's Instagram, there's WhatsApp, there's Messenger as well. So I felt right off the bat, this statement of fleeing users was totally making a mountain of a molehill, right? Or if I put it locally, ikan bilis a whale out of an ikan bilis. For those who do not understand what ikan bilis means, it means anchovies, right? They're making a whale out of an anchovy. And I think that when May came along and they reported their first quarter 2022 results, you can see that whatever was people were freaking out about was totally, they were just off the mark, right? So in the first quarter, Facebook added 31 million daily active users. So apparently, there's no fleeing users at all, right? So that's the first point. I think that when bad news happen, I wouldn't take that one quarter and try to extrapolate it into the next, into the future perpetually. I think you do not want to freak out over one bad result. Sometimes it may be a succession of bad results, but one quarter of bad results shouldn't make you freak out or believe any of these scary headlines. The second part of it, I think, is that when the management started explaining all these challenges they're facing at Apple, right? Or where their targeting has reduced because Apple is restricting the amount of data they can collect. And the second part of it, they also explain how they are not able to come up with better measurements of the return for every advertiser who puts money with Facebook. And the part about this is about management candidness, right? If you want the management to be candid and knowledgeable about what they are facing, you have to give them leeway to explain the problem really in a great detail and to walk through the problem in every single step, in every single detail, right? And the part which a little bit irks me is that when people spend time explaining a problem, it feeds into this negative sentiment crowd because they take it as, oh, the management is clueless. They see this huge problem and they have no response, right? And I think that this is too premature to judge in a way because Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, he's not new to the business. He's been running this for a good part of almost 20 years. They are not even 20 years old yet. And you cannot say that just because they have this description of the problem that everything is bad and it's terrible, right? If you want candidness, you have to take the good news with the bad. And in fact, I think that the ability to describe a problem in great detail is a positive sign. It tells you that the management understands and acknowledges the problems which they're facing. They may not have a solution right off the bat, which is my third point, where you cannot expect the management team to have a well thought out and effective solution to be implemented immediately. You cannot. I think you have to cut some management some slack and give them some leeway where they are able to come up with a better solution which lasts longer, because that's really what you want. You do not want a quick fix which collapses within the next few quarters, right? You want a better and solid solution. And I think that the first quarter has really shown that the management had a better handle of the situation. They were able to provide relevant data. For example, the Reels, which is their answer to TikTok, is now 20% of the time spent on Instagram. And they have also outlined their plans for the near, mid, and long term, right? So you can see that they are more assured, they know what they have to do, and now they just have to execute. Now, I'm not making a call here on Meta, right? But I think that whenever you have a management team with plenty of free cash flow, with plenty of cash, with a seasoned management team, because none of them are new, right? They are quite experienced in managing this business and going through multiple transitions from desktop to mobile, from feed to stories, and so on and so forth. And you have to give them some benefit of doubt, right? Because I think that you cannot expect everything to be solved within a quarter, and you want to give them time, right? And of course, on the side of Meta, they have to show that they will be able to execute the plan which they have laid out, and follow through and demonstrate that they're able to grow again. And I think that this series of thoughts which I wanted to share is just really important, because when things are bad, we tend to assume the worst. And as my one of my favorite investors and mentor once said, if if you're gonna say don't fall in love with your stock, then you should also not fall into hate with your stock. And that comes from Tom Angle, one of my favorite investors.
Right. No, thanks for sharing all this, Chin. I am very much in agreement with you. I think in general, people tend to forget that life is a series of volatile journeys. Life itself isn't smooth. And so I don't think we can ever expect companies to have a smooth trajectory in terms of growing their business. And I think that what's currently troubling Facebook or Meta, in my opinion, will likely be short-term in nature. Every company, even the best ones, will go through periods of time where growth isn't as strong as in the past. And I think it's just a natural part of doing business, right? And I completely agree with you as well in that when a company with a management team with an excellent track record of execution and innovation in the past runs into some temporary problems, my default is to give them the benefit of the doubt, because I think one of the key reasons why I've invested with such a company in the first place is because I admire the management team and I think that they are great, and therefore I would want and therefore I've chosen to partner with them, right? And I think that they are probably one of the smartest guys in the room in their particular space, and so I would also trust that they are likely to be the ones to be able to figure out the solutions to any problems that they are currently facing. And I think what you've also mentioned about the Schadenfreude and like the piling on the misery is perhaps also maybe related to this psychological bias that most humans tend to exhibit, which is the recency bias. We tend to take what has happened most recently and extrapolate and give undue importance to that and extrapolate that into the foreseeable future. So I think in general, when we see a company that has run into problems, we may extrapolate that into perpetuity and think that this is a company that is going to be in a long-term decline. But there are, I think, many cases where companies have just run into temporary problems, but because of the recency bias, we tend to think that this is a problem that is going to be around for a very long period of time.
Mm-hmm. The other thing which I wanted to add on is this sort of post from David Gardner, the co-founder of The Motley Fool, and I know that Ser Jing knows this post. He wrote about, he called it my Jack Bauer apology, and he was writing about Netflix when they went through this Quickster debacle, right? That was in 2011, so more than 10 years ago. And the way he described it was that, firstly, there's this show called 24, and for those of you who do not know what this is about, it's a series where the hero, Jack Bauer, goes through this. There's this program which each season will have 24 episodes, and each episode is exactly an hour, right? And during this 1 hour, the hero will go through all sorts of incredible predicaments, and he will be forced to make some decisions which look bad on him, but then he's doing it for a certain purpose, whether to save the world or prevent a nuclear fallout or prevent an assassin from killing the president or something to that effect, right? And the way David Gardner actually described it was that as an audience, right, we have the full context of what is happening. Whenever we see Jack Bauer doing a certain thing, we empathize with him because we understand everything which is happening in that series. But if you sort of take that scenario and try to implement it back to investing in stocks, right? Most of the time, I feel that we do not have the full context because the show is still happening, right? The hero, in this case, the CEO, which we back, is still trying to figure out what is happening and trying to provide the right context so that you understand why they do and what they are doing, right? And I think this is most evident in the case of Chipotle Mexican Grill, which is another example I have. Back in 2015 or 2016, they actually underwent this E. coli crisis, where a few of their customers actually fell sick after consuming some of their food, right? And this had an immediate impact on Chipotle.
Oh, I wanted to say that for those who aren't aware of what Chipotle Mexican Grill does, it's a company in the US that operates Mexican fast casual restaurants.
Yep. And
for context.
yeah, thank you for that. So, great food too, by the way. Carnitas,
Excellent.
yummy. Yeah,
The burritos are fantastic.
I go for the bowls. But back to the story before we turn this into a foodie program. I think that the initial problem was really clear, right? There's this really bad impression that when you eat at Chipotle, you fall sick, and that you can see that immediately their same store sales growth just collapsed, right? People just stopped going to Chipotle. And the problem, and I think the testing moment came when a year later, the company was really struggling to reinvigorate their business. And at that point of time, I think a lot of people actually sold out of the stock. The share price probably dropped or got cut in half, and people were selling out of it. And more people started to believe that whatever had happened, the brand had been damaged beyond repair, right? And that felt right at the moment, because whenever something bad happens, I think there's a tendency to find the nearest sort of reason to attach with that problem and assume that is why it's suffering, right? But over time, if you follow the business, the actual problem which they were facing were actually twofold. Number one, there's definitely an impact on their brand, but the real problem, if they wanted to reinvigorate their growth, was really that they did not have a delivery solution. They had great food, but they have no way to actually put that food in front of the customer through delivery or pickup. And basically, they do not have all these online options which we are so used to today. Today, you can either do curbside delivery. If you're in the US, you can do drive-thrus. If you're in the US, very common in Singapore, you can now have your food delivered to you, or you can order and pick up at the store, right? And those options were not available at Chipotle, and that was a problem. That was the real problem, but it wasn't clear back then, until the new CEO came in and started putting everything into order. And you can see that the share price since then has recovered tremendously, despite being hit by COVID and so on. So I think that really is a very good example of where David Gardner's, I call it the Jack Bauer scenario, really comes in, where you do have to give some time to understand the whole context of the problem, because whatever you assume, the simplest explanation is not always the right one, right? Apologies to Occam's razor. Yeah.
Right. No, I remember the Chipotle experience very vividly as well. I remember reading on online forums that that there were people basically saying that the business is finished. But I think what's also interesting is that if you look back at history, there have been many other restaurant companies that have also faced food health safety issues and have managed to recover. So, I think it's another example perhaps of the recency bias, right? Like, you see this happening with Chipotle and you're like, oh my God, like, is this gonna completely kill the brand because sales have fallen in the short run? And would the company even be able to survive? But I think, if you look back at a longer run of history, I think the realization may be that, hey, actually, problems like these could perhaps be solvable.
And just for a final note before I pass on to Ser Jing, I think the first restaurant which discovered the E. coli virus, do you know which one is that?
I have no idea.
It's McDonald's.
Wow.
I'm pretty sure McDonald's is still around. So that goes to show. There were even much more serious cases. I think Jack in the Box actually resulted in a death, right? So I think that such incidences happen, and I'm not saying that it's any it's not important and so on. But the company responded to reassure everyone, and but the thing which they really had to do was really to give all these delivery options and digital options for their customer. So
Right.
where are we going next?
Where are we going next? So we are going to be talking about bubbles and chickens.
Bubbles and chickens, okay. The new Netflix
Right.
movie, Bubbles.
No, so this is not some weird Netflix movie I'm talking about, right? So this is actually a piece of the content that I heard about in one episode of the Infinite Loops podcast series. So Infinite Loops is hosted by Jim O'Shaughnessy. So he's actually the father of Patrick O'Shaughnessy, and Patrick O'Shaughnessy is of course the host and the creator of the Colossus family of podcasts. Right. So in one episode of Infinite Loops that featured Tracy Alloway as the guest, Tracy is a journalist, a financial journalist, and a highly accomplished one at that. And she shared this really interesting story that I thought was fascinating. Right. So in the late 1800s or the mid 1800s, right, there was a chicken bubble in the UK, right? And it was because there was this fashion craze for having chickens. And so it's all part of that Victorian era. And they had this fashion craze for having chickens, right? And it was also at that period of time where there was a lot of, where global travel, of course, back then it was ships, right? But global travel kind of started becoming more and more common. And so these intrepid merchants would actually bring in wild, fancy chickens from Indonesia into the UK. Right, and then that created this huge price bubble. People went crazy over chickens, right? The price of chickens went up. The people were breeding chickens, right? And it was just according to LOA at least, just a crazy time for chickens. But what was also really interesting is that it was during that period of time when Charles Darwin, the father of the theory of evolution, kind of first started thinking about the theory of evolution, right? And he was able to use the chickens that were brought in from Indonesia, those wild fancy chickens, and he would breed them with the domestic chickens that were found in the UK. And he realized that these chickens could be bred. And so he realized that, hey, they were perhaps related, and that actually helped inform him or helped him develop his theory of evolution as well. So that was actually a crucial step in his evolution, pun intended, as this creator of the theory of evolution. So I thought that was really interesting because I think you and I, we have spoken quite a bit about in the past, whenever I've met, that bubbles, financial bubbles, oftentimes have resulted, even though they often result in financial pain and all for the participants, but oftentimes they've also resulted in the creation of really important products or services or discoveries or what have you, right, that would then go on to benefit society. So in the case of this chicken bubble, it actually helped in the creation of the theory of evolution that has been such an important aspect of modern life that we know today. Yep. So that's one just very interesting story about chicken and bubbles that I've heard about recently. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts about what have you learned or come across about in recent years in terms of the benefits that come from financial bubbles.
I won't say I won't go as far as to say that financial bubbles are good. I don't think. I think don't get me wrong. I mean, I don't think that financial bubbles are good at all. But I think it's that sometimes you have these some of the side effects of bubbles that turn out to be positive. I'm struggling to remember the author's name, but I do remember him saying that let's have a green bubble, right? And what he meant was that and he pointed to the example of the dot-com boom, right, where you have all this huge amount of investments, and it sounds a lot like crypto today, right? You have this huge amount of investments. The expectations were so high, and people totally overestimated what could be done in the near term and underestimated what could be done over the long term, right? There's also the statement that a lot of the businesses which tried to be launched back in year 2000 are actually available today. The likes of Webvan, for example, is
Pets.com.
Yeah, and and those businesses were actually attempting to do something which the world was not ready for. And today, for pets.com, I think there's Chewy's, um,
That's
pet,
right, Chewies.
and there's a lot more. I think it's a lot more acceptable to actually do online delivery. I think Tractor Supply, for example, does a lot of um, buy online and pick up on store. I think 70% of their digital orders or something to that effect, right? So I I think that there's some merit to that, where there's all these investments which create all this innovation, and those who survive will be actually able to thrive, provided they solve a need which the customer may or may not know. But he also pointed to the fact that the great financial crisis didn't really create anything good out of it. It was just excess and speculation, which just went way out of hand, and there was no real innovation or like invention, which sort of created something good out of this bubble. But
It depends, actually. I mean, uh, Bitcoin, the creation of Bitcoin came about
yeah, you can
roughly
say
at
that.
the time
It's
when
true.
the financial crisis exploded. So, it depends if someone thinks that Bitcoin or the creation of cryptocurrencies could be a really
Mhm.
important benefit for society, then yes, the financial crisis of '08 and '09 would have resulted in an
That's a
important
good point, actually.
innovation.
Yeah. The one thing I noticed about Bitcoin is there's this very deep resentment. I think that a lot of 20 or 30 years old people who have actually gone through this period actually recounted very severe situations which their parents went through. And I can sense a deep resentment, and maybe that's why all these new services such as buy now pay later, it's sort of like sticking it to the man. They do not want to use the old credit cards and the old banks. They want something new and not related to the old world economy, so to speak. Um, right-headed or wrong-headed, it's something which I think cannot be ignored. Which is why it goes back to uh, the point where he said we should have a green bubble where we have this over speculation of green energy and ESG and all that, and
Yep.
really have that innovation boom out of that. I'm not so sure that that's the best idea, but there you go.
Yeah, I mean, I would love that, to have cheaper and cheaper energy coming from a source that is nearly infinite, like the sun. I think that would be wonderful for the world.
Oh, by the way, the
Moving
author's
on.
name is
Yep.
Thomas Friedman. The
Ah,
world.
right, right.
Yeah.
That's great. Yep. Okay, but moving on. The next thing I'd like to talk about is has to do with running and soul in the game. Right. So again, it's related to a podcast that I was listening to recently, and it's from the Acquired family of podcasts. And it was an interview that featured Jim Weber, who is the CEO of Brooks Running. So Brooks Running is uh, a company that manufactures running shoes. And I think USA would be its largest market. And what's interesting about Brooks is that it's a subsidiary of Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's investment conglomerate. And Jim Weber, the CEO, is actually a direct report to Buffett. So he reports directly to Buffett. And I thought that the interview was a really good window into a Buffett CEO. And I think, it's quite rare for people to be able to get insightful views on what Buffett CEO and how Buffett CEOs think about businesses and how they operate and so on. But what really struck me, yep.
Yep. I think there's actually a book where covers all the interviews with the Buffett CEOs, but I'll get the title for you.
Oh,
Continue.
we can put that in the show notes.
Yeah.
Yep. So, So what really struck me about Jim Weber was this whole concept of, I think, soul in the game. So during the interview, Weber shared that he developed cancer about 5 years ago, and that cancer had only a 20% 5-year survival rate. Right, but upon learning that he had that disease, he still decided to carry on with his job as the CEO of Brooks Running, and the reason was because he realized that this was what he really wanted to do. Right, and that got me thinking, because what I've realized is that Jim Weber probably did not have much skin in the game when it comes to Brooks Running, right? Because as a subsidiary of Berkshire, uh, Berkshire probably owns nearly all of Brooks' shares. So Weber probably did not have much skin in the game, but he had that soul in the game. He wanted to carry on running the company, even though he he was ill, right? And I also realized that this is true for, I think, many of Buffett's CEOs as well, because uh, when Berkshire acquires companies, they often acquire fully, or they leave only a small minority stake for the previous owners, right? And so what happens is that the skin in the game for these CEOs have declined, but it somehow seems that the soul in the game remains the same, or perhaps becomes even stronger after Buffett's involvement. Right? And so this got me thinking, like, is soul in the game actually even more important than skin in the game? And how can we better, or rather, how can I better discover or find or identify CEOs or business leaders with soul in the game?
Mhm. I think it may be difficult because the example which comes off the top of my head is Steve Jobs. I think that the late Steve Jobs, I think he knew for a while that he had pancreatic cancer, which had no cure. And I do remember him telling Bob Iger before, I think that that was when Disney acquired Pixar, right? And it was the case where before the acquisition closed, Steve Jobs actually informed Bob Iger that he had this diagnosis, if I'm not wrong. And maybe not as many people know that Steve Jobs' greatest wealth is actually not with Apple
That's
shares.
right.
It's
That's
actually
right.
his biggest sort of holding is actually Disney, and it's that way because he sold Pixar to Disney. So he received Disney shares as a result, and his estate when he passed away, the largest portion was actually with Disney shares.
Yep. So I think that's a really good example of how a CEO with relatively little skin in the game can yet do such amazing things to the company because he has that soul in the game. But yeah, it's just a thought that I have. How can we better identify that? And I think in terms of like the companies that I'm aware of today, I think the one that I am quite confident has significant soul in the game would actually be Eric Yuan of Zoom. Right, and I think the reason is because when you look at his Zoom's founding story, I thought that was quite amazing, right? Like Eric Yuan has described his previous company, which is WebEx, as like his baby. And what happened was WebEx was sold to Cisco, and when he was in Cisco, he realized that the WebEx product started disappointing its customers significantly, and he thought that the WebEx became like a really crappy product. But he loved the idea of creating great products that his customers would love, and so he felt that he had no choice but to leave Cisco in order to create a new video conferencing solution that would be much better, and then that resulted in the birth of Zoom, right? And I think that and it's quite unusual, I think, when it comes to CEOs using the word love in official communications, right? Eric Yuan, I think, will often say that I love customer A, B, and C, right? And I thought that was that is quite interesting. But yeah, I think I'm still very early in my process of trying to better identify management teams with soul in the game. Yeah, but I guess perhaps this part can be improved. I think if we have access to face-to-face interactions with management teams, and that's perhaps why I think why Buffett probably has such a high hit rate as well, because I think he often gets to speak to these management teams face-to-face or perhaps over the phone as well, right? And not just rely on written communications. Yeah, but yeah, that's just an interesting thought that I have. This whole importance of soul in the game.
Yeah, fantastic. I thought we are running out of time now, but I think I'll just end with one sort of this was a speech by the late Steve Jobs during Stanford. But knowing what you know today, where he was facing a pancreatic cancer, it really gives you new context to what he does every day at the end of his work day every day. So basically what Steve Jobs does is that he'll look into the mirror and he'll ask himself this question. If you knew you were in your last day, last month, or last year in your life, the question is, would you be doing the work you are doing now, right? Would you want the life you're living today, right? And he said that if the answer has been no for too many days in a row, he knows that he needs to change something. And with that, I think that we can end the podcast.
That's a great place to end.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you all.